The bullet had torn through her side while she was running from the outlaws who had ambushed her family's wagon 3 miles outside of Durango, Colorado. And now, as the August sun beat down mercilessly in 1878, Josephine Ellis stumbled through the scrub brush trying to find somewhere, anywhere, to hide before the fever cooking her brain made her collapse entirely. She had been walking for what felt like days but was probably only hours, her calico dress soaked through with sweat and blood, her vision swimming in and out of focus as she tried to put one foot in front of the other. The landscape blurred into browns and golds, the mountains in the distance wavering like a mirage, and she knew with grim certainty that if she did not find help soon, she would die out here in this unforgiving wilderness where her parents already lay dead on the trail behind her. Samuel Drake had been tracking a stallion for the better part of the afternoon, following its prints through the rocky terrain with the patience that came from 26 years of living in this harsh country. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered from years of ranch work, with sun-darkened skin and hands calloused from rope and reins. His hat was pulled low against the glare, but nothing could block out the heat that shimmered off the rocks and made the air taste like dust. He was about to give up and head back to his small ranch when he saw something that made him rein in his horse sharply. A woman lay crumpled beneath a juniper tree, her dress torn and stained dark with blood that looked almost black in the shade. Samuel was off his horse before he had fully processed what he was seeing, his boots hitting the ground hard as he ran to her side. When he turned her over gently, he sucked in a sharp breath. She was young, maybe 22 or 23, with dark hair matted to her forehead and a face so pale it looked almost translucent. But what made his stomach clench was the wound in her side, visible through the torn fabric of her dress. The flesh around the bullet hole was red and swollen, radiating heat even from inches away. Fever had set in, and set in hard. Her skin was burning to the touch when he pressed his hand to her forehead, and when he carefully examined the wound, he could see the angry infection spreading outward like poison through her body. She was unconscious but breathing, each breath shallow and rapid. "Hold on," he said, though she could not hear him. "Just hold on." He could not move her far in this condition. The ride back to his ranch would take nearly an hour, and he was not sure she would survive being jostled on horseback with that infection raging through her. Looking around quickly, Samuel spotted a small overhang in the rocks about 50 yards away, offering better shade and protection from the elements. He lifted her as carefully as he could, alarmed at how light she was, how her head lolled against his shoulder like a rag doll. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, and he could feel the fever radiating off her in waves. He laid her down in the shade of the overhang and immediately went to work. His saddlebags yielded a canteen of water, a clean shirt, and a small kit he always carried for emergencies. But as he looked at the infected wound, he knew this was beyond basic first aid. The bullet was still in there, he could tell, and the infection would only get worse until it was removed. He had seen men die from less, had buried friends whose wounds had turned septic in the days before they could reach a doctor. But there was no doctor here. There was only him, and the woman was dying. Samuel built a small fire and set his knife in the flames to sterilize it, his jaw clenched tight as he worked. He soaked his spare shirt in water from the canteen and began to clean the wound as gently as he could, washing away the dried blood and dirt. The woman stirred slightly, a low moan escaping her lips, but she did not wake. That was probably for the best, he thought grimly. What he was about to do would be agonizing. When the knife was hot enough, he took a deep breath and began to probe the wound, searching for the bullet. The woman's body jerked beneath his hands, and even unconscious, she cried out in pain. Sweat dripped down his face, mixing with the dust and grime, but he forced his hands to stay steady. He could feel the metal lodge deep in the muscle, and he worked carefully to extract it without causing more damage. It felt like hours, but was probably only minutes before he finally pulled the flattened slug free and tossed it aside. Blood welled up immediately, and he packed the wound with strips of clean cloth, pressing hard to stop the bleeding. The woman was shaking now, trembling violently despite the heat, and he knew the fever was getting worse. He needed to get it down, needed to fight the infection before it killed her. Samuel worked through the fading afternoon light, bathing her burning skin with cool water, changing the dressings on her wound, forcing drops of water between her cracked lips whenever she seemed even slightly conscious. He talked to her as he worked, not sure if she could hear him but needing to fill the silence somehow. "You are going to be all right," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "I know it does not feel like it, but you are going to pull through. You are a fighter, I can tell. Nobody who was not a fighter would have made it as far as you did with a wound like that." As the sun set, and the desert air turned cold the way it always did in the mountains, Samuel built up the fire and positioned himself beside the woman to share his warmth. She was still burning with fever, but the violent shaking had subsided somewhat. He kept changing the cool compresses on her forehead, kept checking the wound for fresh bleeding, kept forcing water past her lips drop by drop. The night stretched out long and dark around them. Samuel did not sleep. Every time the woman's breathing changed or she stirred restlessly, he was there, adjusting her position to make her more comfortable, checking her pulse, whispering reassurances. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the small drama playing out beneath them. Sometime past midnight, the woman's eyes fluttered open. They were gray, he noticed, the color of storm clouds, and they were unfocused with fever and pain. "Where?" she whispered, the word barely audible. "You are safe," Samuel said quickly, leaning closer so she could see his face in the firelight. "You were hurt, but you are safe now. I am Samuel Drake. I found you out in the scrub." Her eyes tried to focus on him, and he saw the moment memory came crashing back. Her face contorted with grief so raw it was painful to witness. "They killed them," she said, her voice breaking. "The outlaws, they killed my parents. They wanted the money we were carrying to start our new life. They just shot them. Papa tried to fight, and they shot him, and then Mama and I ran, but they shot her too, and then they shot me, but I kept running. I just kept running." Tears streamed down her temples into her hair, and Samuel found himself reaching out to grasp her hand, letting her squeeze his fingers with what little strength she had. "I am so sorry," he said, and meant it with everything in him. "I am so damn sorry, but they did not get you. You survived. You kept fighting. Why?" The word was filled with such anguish it cut him to the bone. "Why did I survive when they did not?" "I do not know," Samuel said honestly, "but you did. And that means something, that has to mean something." She closed her eyes again, more tears escaping, and he thought she had drifted back into unconsciousness. But then she whispered, "Josephine, my name is Josephine Ellis." "Josephine," he repeated softly. "That is a good, strong name. You rest now, Josephine. I am going to stay right here. You are not alone." He felt her hand relax slightly in his, though she did not let go entirely, and he settled in to continue his vigil. The night was cold and uncomfortable, the rocks hard beneath him, but he did not move away. He had made a promise, and Samuel Drake always kept his word. By the time dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Josephine's fever had broken slightly. She was still hot to the touch, still weak as a newborn kitten, but the burning intensity had diminished. Samuel allowed himself a small moment of hope as he checked her wound in the growing light. It still looked angry and inflamed, but he did not think it was getting worse. That would have to be enough for now. Josephine woke properly as the sun climbed higher, and this time her eyes were clearer, more focused. She looked around at the makeshift camp, at the man sitting beside her with exhaustion written across his features, and understanding dawned slowly. "You stayed," she said, her voice still weak but steadier than before. "I said I would," Samuel replied, reaching for the canteen. "Can you drink some water?" She nodded, and he helped her sit up enough to take small sips. The movement clearly pained her, her face going white and her breath catching, but she did not cry out. When she had drunk her fill, he eased her back down. "We need to get you to a doctor," Samuel said, "but I need to know if you can handle the ride. It is about an hour to my ranch, and from there we can get you into Durango proper, but it is going to hurt." Josephine's jaw tightened. "I can handle it. I have to. I need to tell someone what happened. Those men who killed my parents, they need to face justice." "They will," Samuel promised. "We will make sure of it. But first we need to get you well enough to tell your story." He fashioned a more secure bandage for her wound, tearing up the last of his spare clothing to create padding and support. Then he lifted her carefully onto his horse, settling into the saddle behind her so he could hold her steady. She slumped back against his chest, and he could feel every tremor of pain that went through her body as the horse began to move. "Talk to me," she said through gritted teeth as they rode. "Please, I need something else to think about besides the pain." So Samuel talked. He told her about his ranch, a small spread with good water and decent grazing that he had built up over the last 5 years. He told her about coming west from Missouri as a young man, about learning the ranching trade the hard way, about the satisfaction of working the land and watching something grow from your own sweat and effort. He told her about the books he read on long winter nights, about the letters he exchanged with his sister back east, about his plans to expand the herd come spring. And gradually, hesitantly, Josephine began to talk too. She told him about growing up in Kansas, about her father's dream of starting a freight business in Colorado, about her mother's beautiful singing voice and her father's terrible jokes. She told him about leaving behind friends and familiar places for the promise of something new, and how excited they had all been despite the risks. Her voice broke when she spoke of them, but she kept talking, as though speaking their names kept them alive somehow. By the time they reached Samuel's ranch, Josephine was slipping in and out of consciousness again, her body finally giving in to the trauma and exhaustion. Samuel's ranch hand, an older man named Pete, came running when he saw them approach. "Get the wagon ready," Samuel called out. "We need to get her to Doc Winters in town right now." Pete took one look at the pale woman in Samuel's arms and ran to hitch up the wagon. Samuel carried Josephine inside his small cabin and laid her on his own bed, the only real bed on the property. He changed her bandages one more time, relieved to see that the bleeding had mostly stopped, then covered her with clean blankets. "Josephine," he said, touching her face gently, "we are going to take you to the doctor now. Just hold on a little longer." Her eyes opened briefly. "You will stay?" she asked, and there was something vulnerable in her voice that made his heart clench. "I will stay," he promised, "every step of the way." The ride into Durango was the longest hour of Samuel's life. He sat in the back of the wagon with Josephine's head in his lap, one hand pressed against her wound to keep pressure on it, the other holding her hand. Pete drove the horses hard, and Samuel was grateful for the older man's skill and speed. Dr. Hiram Winters was a capable man in his 50s who had seen his share of gunshot wounds and frontier medicine. He took one look at Josephine and immediately began barking orders, clearing his examination table and demanding hot water and clean linens. Samuel found himself pushed to the side as the doctor and his wife worked over Josephine with practiced efficiency. "You got the bullet out?" Dr. Winters asked without looking up. "Yes, sir," Samuel said. "Last evening." "Probably saved her life doing that," the doctor said. "Another day and the infection would have been too far gone. As it is, she has a fighting chance." Samuel felt something loosen in his chest, some tight knot of fear he had been carrying since he first found her. A fighting chance. That was more than she had had yesterday. The next 3 days passed in a blur. Dr. Winters kept Josephine in his small clinic, dosing her with medicine to fight the infection and keep the fever down. Samuel barely left her side except when the doctor insisted he needed to rest. He slept in a chair next to her bed, waking at every sound to check on her. He helped the doctor's wife change bandages, brought fresh water, and simply sat holding Josephine's hand through the worst of the fever dreams. On the 4th day, Josephine woke up with clear eyes and a steady voice. The fever had broken for good this time, and though she was still weak and in pain, the doctor pronounced her on the mend. When she saw Samuel dozing in the chair beside her bed, his hand still holding hers, she felt tears prick her eyes. "You really did stay," she whispered. Samuel jerked awake at the sound of her voice, and when he saw her looking at him with those clear gray eyes, he smiled for the first time in days. "I told you I would. How are you feeling?" "Like I was shot and then had frontier surgery without any proper medicine," she said, but there was a hint of humor in her voice. "But alive. Thanks to you." "You did the hard part," Samuel said. "You survived long enough to be found. That took more strength than anything I did." The sheriff came that afternoon, a grizzled man named Tom Carter who listened carefully as Josephine described the attack on her family. She gave him every detail she could remember about the outlaws, their horses, the direction they had been heading. Her voice only broke once, when she described watching her mother fall, and Samuel reached over to take her hand without thinking. Sheriff Carter promised to form a posse and track the men down. "We have had reports of a gang working this area," he said. "Your description matches what we know." "We will find them, miss. I promise you that." After the sheriff left, Josephine lay back against the pillows, exhausted. "I need to arrange funerals," she said quietly. "For my parents. I need to see them buried properly." "Already done," Samuel said gently. "The sheriff found the wagon and your parents' bodies. He had the reverend see to them proper. They are buried in the church cemetery under the cottonwoods. I hope that was all right. I did not want to wait, and I did not want to put you through that while you were still so sick." Fresh tears spilled down Josephine's cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. "I do not even know how to thank you for everything you have done." "You do not need to thank me," Samuel said. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Josephine said firmly. "Not everyone would have." "You saved my life, Samuel Drake. That is not something I will ever forget." Over the next 2 weeks, as Josephine recovered under Dr. Winters' care, Samuel visited every day. He brought her books to read, told her news from town, and simply kept her company during the long hours of healing. They talked about everything and nothing, and Samuel found himself looking forward to these visits with an intensity that surprised him. There was something about Josephine that drew him in, a strength and resilience that showed in everything she did. She was beautiful too, with those storm-gray eyes and dark hair, but it was more than that. It was the way she laughed despite her grief, the way she asked questions about his ranch with genuine interest, the way she looked at him like he was someone worth knowing. Josephine felt it too, this strange connection growing between them. This man who had saved her life, who had stayed with her through the worst night of her life, who had cleaned her wounds and held her hand, and never once made her feel like a burden. She found herself watching for him, listening for his footsteps in the hall, feeling her heart lift when he walked through the door. It terrified her a little, these feelings coming so soon after such tragedy, but she could not seem to stop them. When Dr. Winters finally declared her well enough to leave his care, Josephine faced a new problem. She had nowhere to go. The money her parents had been carrying was gone, taken by the outlaws. She had no family left, no home waiting for her. Durango was as strange to her as the moon. "You could stay with my wife and me for a while," Dr. Winters offered kindly, "until you figure out what you want to do." Josephine was about to accept gratefully when Samuel spoke up. "Or you could come to the ranch." Everyone turned to look at him, and he felt his ears grow hot. "I mean, I have the space," he said quickly. "The cabin is small, but there is a separate room, and Pete's wife Martha comes by twice a week to do washing and cooking. She could use the help, actually, and she would be good company, if you wanted. Only if you wanted." Josephine looked at him for a long moment, and Samuel wished he could read what was going on behind those gray eyes. Finally, she smiled. "I would like that," she said. "Very much, but only if you let me actually help. I am not a charity case. I can cook and clean and help with the ranch work as I get stronger." "You have a deal," Samuel said, and his smile was so bright it made her heart flutter. So Josephine Ellis moved to Samuel Drake's ranch, and a new chapter of both their lives began. The separate room turned out to be barely more than a closet with a cot, but Josephine did not complain. She threw herself into making herself useful, helping Martha with the cooking and cleaning, tending the kitchen garden, even learning to help with some of the lighter ranch chores as her strength returned. The wound in her side healed slowly but surely, leaving a puckered scar that she knew she would carry for the rest of her life. Samuel found himself constantly aware of her presence in his home. The way she hummed while she worked, the way she laughed at Pete's stories, the way she looked at sunset with something like peace on her face. They fell into an easy routine, working side by side during the day, talking long into the evening by the fire. Samuel taught her to ride properly, patient with her nervousness after everything she had been through. Josephine taught him the songs her mother used to sing, her voice sweet and clear in the mountain air. It was Martha who saw it first, the way they looked at each other when they thought no one was watching. The way Samuel's face softened when Josephine entered a room, the way Josephine's eyes followed Samuel as he worked. Martha said nothing, but she smiled to herself and made sure to give them plenty of opportunities to be alone together. Fall came to the mountains, painting the aspens gold and bringing cold nights that required fires and warm blankets. Samuel found excuses to stay up later, to linger over coffee, to extend their evening conversations. Josephine found herself making his favorite foods, mending his shirts with extra care, looking for ways to make him smile. Neither of them spoke of what was growing between them, but it was there nonetheless, building like a fire from carefully tended coals. The breaking point came on an October evening when news arrived that the sheriff had caught the outlaws who killed Josephine's parents. All 5 men were in custody, awaiting trial. Samuel found Josephine sitting outside on the porch steps, staring out at the darkening mountains with tears streaming down her face. "I should feel happy," she said when he sat down beside her. "They caught them. Justice will be done. But all I feel is sad. My parents are still dead. Catching the men who did it does not bring them back." "No," Samuel agreed quietly. "It does not, but maybe it can let you start to heal, to move forward." "I do not know if I want to move forward," Josephine admitted, her voice breaking. "Moving forward means accepting that they are gone, that I am alone in the world, that everything we planned and hoped for is just gone like smoke." "You are not alone," Samuel said, and before he could second-guess himself, he reached over and took her hand. You have not been alone since I found you under that juniper tree, and you do not have to be alone now, not unless you want to be." Josephine turned to look at him, her eyes wide in the fading light. "Samuel, what are you saying?" He took a deep breath, knowing he was about to either make the best or worst decision of his life. "I am saying that I have fallen in love with you, Josephine Ellis. I know it is probably too soon. I know you are still grieving. I know I have no right to say any of this when you have barely had time to catch your breath. But I cannot keep it in any more. You are the strongest, bravest, most remarkable woman I have ever met, and I love you. I love your laugh and your courage and the way you face each day even when it would be easier to give up. I love you and I want you to stay. Not as a guest or a hired hand, but as my wife, if you will have me." Josephine stared at him in shock, her mind reeling. She opened her mouth to speak, closed it again, opened it once more. She started, then stopped. "Samuel, I do not know what to say." "Then do not say anything yet," Samuel said, though his heart was hammering so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. "Think about it. Take your time." "I am not going anywhere." But Josephine was shaking her head. "No," she said. "No, I do not need time." Samuel felt his heart sink like a stone. He had pushed too hard, moved too fast. Of course she did not want him. What had he been thinking? "I do not need time," Josephine continued, "because I already know my answer. Yes." Samuel's head snapped up. "What?" "Yes," Josephine said, and now she was crying and laughing at the same time. "Yes, I will marry you. I love you too, Samuel. I have been trying not to, trying to tell myself it was too soon and that I was just grateful to you for saving my life. But it is more than that. So much more. You make me feel safe and understood, and like maybe I can build a new life from the ashes of the old one. You make me want to live again instead of just survive. Yes, I will marry you. Yes, yes, yes." Samuel pulled her into his arms, careful of her still healing wound, and kissed her with everything he had been holding back for months. She kissed him back just as fiercely, her hands tangling in his hair. And for a long moment the rest of the world fell away until there was nothing but the two of them and the promise of a future they would build together. They were married 3 weeks later in the little church in Durango, with Pete and Martha standing up as witnesses. Josephine wore a simple dress that Martha had helped her make, pale blue calico with white lace at the collar. Samuel wore his best suit, the one he had brought from Missouri and rarely had occasion to wear. When the Reverend pronounced them man and wife, Samuel kissed his bride with such joy that several people in the small congregation wiped their eyes. The winter that followed was the happiest time Samuel could remember. Learning to live together as husband and wife was an adjustment, but they approached it the same way they approached everything else, with humor and patience and genuine affection. Josephine proved to be an excellent ranch wife, capable and resourceful and never afraid of hard work. Samuel found himself falling more in love with her every single day, amazed that this incredible woman had chosen to build a life with him. They visited her parents' graves regularly, and Samuel would stand back quietly while Josephine told them about her new life. He knew she still grieved them, probably always would, but the sharp edge of that grief had softened into something more bearable. She was healing, inside and out, and he was honored to be part of that process. Spring came, and with it the work of calving season and branding. Josephine threw herself into the work, learning the rhythms of ranch life, earning the respect of Pete and the few other hands they employed. She had a way with the animals, a gentle steadiness that they responded to, and Samuel often found himself just watching her work with a smile on his face. It was in late June that Josephine realized she had missed her monthly courses twice in a row. She said nothing at first, afraid to hope, afraid to jinx it. But when a third month passed and she began to feel sick in the mornings, she knew. She was carrying Samuel's child. She told him one evening after supper, nervous despite herself. They had never discussed children, had been too caught up in just being together to plan that far ahead. What if he was not ready? What if this was too much too soon? But Samuel's reaction erased all her fears. His face lit up with such pure joy that she felt tears spring to her eyes. He picked her up and spun her around, then immediately set her down carefully as though she might break. "Are you happy?" Josephine asked, even though she could see the answer on his face. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Samuel said, pulling her close and resting his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "A baby, our baby. Josephine, you have made me the happiest man in Colorado, in the whole world." The pregnancy was not easy. Josephine was sick for months, barely able to keep food down, and there were times when she wondered if she would ever feel normal again. But Samuel was there through all of it, holding her hair while she was sick, bringing her crackers and weak tea, rubbing her back when it ached. He read to her on the bad days, talked to her belly on the good ones, and never once complained about the extra work he had to take on. In February of 1880, on a snowy night when the world outside was silent and white, Josephine went into labor. Dr. Winters had agreed to come out to the ranch, and he arrived with his wife just as the contractions began in earnest. Samuel was banished to the main room of the cabin, left to pace and worry while the sounds of his wife's pain drifted through the thin walls. It was the longest night of his life, worse even than that night he had spent tending her wounds under the stars. At least then, he had been able to do something. Now he could only wait and pray and try not to imagine all the things that could go wrong. As dawn broke over the mountains, a new sound joined the morning birdsong, the wailing cry of a newborn baby. Samuel was through the door before Dr. Winters could call him, his eyes immediately finding Josephine. She looked exhausted, her hair matted with sweat and her face pale, but she was smiling. In her arms, wrapped in a clean blanket, was the smallest person Samuel had ever seen. "It is a boy," Josephine said, her voice hoarse but filled with wonder. "Samuel, we have a son." Samuel crossed the room on shaking legs and looked down at his child. The baby had stopped crying and was staring up at him with dark blue eyes, one tiny fist waving in the air. He was perfect, absolutely perfect. "Can I hold him?" Samuel asked, his voice rough with emotion. Josephine carefully transferred the baby into his father's arms, and Samuel felt his whole world shift on its axis. This tiny person, this perfect combination of him and the woman he loved, was depending on him, would look to him for protection and guidance and love. The weight of that responsibility was staggering and wonderful all at once. "Hello, son," he whispered. "Welcome to the world. I am your papa, and I promise you right now that I will always keep you safe. I will always love you. You and your mama are my whole world." The baby yawned, completely unimpressed by his father's declarations, and Samuel laughed through the tears streaming down his face. They named him Thomas, after Josephine's father, with the middle name of James for Samuel's father who had died when Samuel was young. Little Tommy, as they called him, proved to be a good baby, healthy and strong and blessed with his mother's gray eyes and his father's dark hair. Samuel was a devoted father, never too tired to walk the floor with a crying baby or too busy to play when Tommy started to crawl and then toddle around the cabin. Josephine watched her husband with their son and fell in love with him all over again. She had thought she knew the depths of Samuel's kindness and strength, but seeing him as a father revealed new dimensions. He was patient and gentle but also playful, wrestling with Tommy on the floor and making silly faces that sent the boy into peals of laughter. He sang off-key lullabies and told stories, and never once complained about the ways their lives had been upended by parenthood. Life settled into a new rhythm at the ranch. The herd grew, the business prospered, and Tommy thrived. When he was 2, Josephine told Samuel she was expecting again, and this time the pregnancy was easier. Their daughter, Elena May, arrived in the spring of 1882, a tiny thing with dark curls and her father's smile. Tommy was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything, and convinced that he was her special protector. The years passed in the way that good years do, marked by small joys and ordinary moments that accumulated into a life worth living. Samuel expanded the ranch, buying adjoining land and increasing the herd until they were one of the most successful operations in the region. Josephine became a pillar of the small community, known for her kindness and her willingness to help neighbors in need. She never forgot what it was like to lose everything, and she made sure that anyone who needed help always found it at the Drake Ranch. Tommy grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved the ranch and the animals, and already showed signs of having his father's way with horses. Elena was her mother's shadow, learning to cook and sew and garden, but she also had a wild streak that sent her climbing trees and racing her brother across the fields. Samuel and Josephine watched their children grow with a mixture of pride and wonder, grateful every day for the family they had built together. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Samuel took Josephine back to the place where he had found her. They rode out together in the early morning, leaving the children with Martha, and made their way to the juniper tree where their story had really begun. It still stood there, twisted and gnarled, providing shade in the harsh landscape. "I come out here sometimes," Josephine admitted as they stood together in the shade. "When I need to think or remember, it seems like a different life now, but it was only 10 years ago." "I think about it too," Samuel said, putting his arm around her shoulders. "That day changed everything. If I had been an hour later, if I had gone a different direction, if I had not seen you in time." "But you did," Josephine said, leaning into his warmth. "You found me when I needed you most, and you stayed. You have been staying ever since." "I will stay forever," Samuel promised. "For as long as you will have me." "Forever, then," Josephine said, turning to kiss him. "Forever sounds just about right." They stood there for a while, wrapped in each other's arms, looking out at the mountains that had witnessed both the worst and best moments of their lives. The desert was harsh and unforgiving, but it was also beautiful in its own way. It had tested them, shaped them, and ultimately given them to each other. As they rode back to the ranch, Josephine thought about the journey that had brought her here. The pain and loss, yes, but also the unexpected gift of love that had grown from tragedy. Her parents would have liked Samuel, she thought. They would have been proud of the life she had built, the family she had raised, the person she had become. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set behind the mountains, their children playing in the yard before them, Samuel reached over and took Josephine's hand. It was a gesture as familiar as breathing now, something they had done thousands of times over the years, but it still made her heart warm. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, seeing the thoughtful expression on his face. "About how lucky I am," Samuel said simply. "I was just a cowboy with a small ranch and a quiet life, and then I found you and everything became more, better, fuller. You gave me a family, Josephine. You gave me a reason to build something that will last beyond my lifetime. I cannot imagine what my life would be like if I had not found you that day." "You saved my life," Josephine reminded him, "more than just physically. You gave me a reason to keep living when I had lost everything. You loved me back to life, Samuel Drake." "I guess we saved each other then," Samuel said with a smile. "I guess we did," Josephine agreed, squeezing his hand. The children's laughter rang out across the yard as Tommy chased Alina around the garden, both of them shrieking with joy. The cattle lowed peacefully in the distance, settling down for the night. The mountains stood eternal against the darkening sky, their peaks still touched with gold from the setting sun. It was an ordinary evening at the ranch, the kind they had shared hundreds of times and would share hundreds more. But as Samuel and Josephine sat together in the peaceful twilight, their hands clasped and their hearts full, they knew there was nothing ordinary about it at all. Every moment was a gift, every day a blessing they had earned through pain and patience and unwavering love. The years continued to roll by with the changing seasons, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. Tommy grew tall and strong, eventually taking over more and more of the ranch work until he was as capable as his father. Alina surprised them by announcing at 15 that she wanted to be a teacher, and they supported her dreams by sending her to the new school that had opened in Durango. She came home on weekends with stories about her classes and plans for her future, and Josephine saw echoes of the girl she herself had been before tragedy struck. More grandchildren followed in time. Tommy married a rancher's daughter named Sarah, and they gave Samuel and Josephine 3 grandchildren who were just as wild and wonderful as their parents had been. Alina eventually married a schoolteacher from Denver, and they settled in Durango where she could continue her work educating the children of the growing town. Through it all, Samuel and Josephine remained the steady center of their growing family. They worked the ranch together until age made the physical labor too difficult, then transitioned into advisory roles while Tommy took over day-to-day operations. They traveled a bit, taking the train to Denver and once even going back to Missouri to visit Samuel's sister. But they always came home to the ranch, to the mountains, to the life they had built together. On a warm summer evening in 1903, 25 years after Samuel had found Josephine bleeding and feverish under a juniper tree, they sat together on the porch of the ranch house that had been expanded and improved over the decades, but was still fundamentally the same place where they had built their life. They were both gray now, their faces lined with age and sun, their hands weathered from years of work. But when Samuel looked at Josephine, he still saw the brave young woman who had survived the unsurvivable. And when Josephine looked at Samuel, she still saw the cowboy who had stayed with her through the darkest night and every day since. "You ever regret it?" Samuel asked, a question that had never occurred to him to ask before. "The life we built here, it has been hard sometimes. Maybe you could have had an easier life somewhere else." Josephine looked at him in surprise, then smiled and shook her head. "Not for one single second," she said firmly. "You gave me love when I thought I would never feel anything but pain again. You gave me a family to replace the one I lost. You gave me a home and a purpose and 25 years of happiness. How could I possibly regret that? We gave each other those things," Samuel corrected gently. "I was just a lonely cowboy before you came into my life. You made everything mean something." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. In the distance, they could see Tommy working with one of the horses, his own children playing nearby under their mother's watchful eye. The ranch was thriving, the family was growing, and the legacy they had built together would continue long after they were gone. "Thank you," Josephine said suddenly. "For what?" Samuel asked. "For finding me," she said simply. "For cleaning my wounds and staying through the night. For giving me a reason to live. For loving me so completely that I learned to live again instead of just exist. For everything, Samuel. Thank you for everything." Samuel brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Thank you for letting me," he said. "Thank you for choosing me in this life and building something beautiful out of tragedy. I love you, Josephine Drake. I loved you from the moment I saw you fighting for your life under that tree, and I will love you until the day I die and beyond." "I love you too," Josephine said, tears shining in her eyes. "Always and forever." They sat together as the stars began to appear one by one in the darkening sky. The same stars that had watched over them that first night were still there, constant and eternal. And beneath them, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances continued to hold hands, their love story written in the lines on their faces, and the family they had created, and the life they had lived together. The Wild West had been harsh and unforgiving, had taken much from both of them. But it had also given them to each other, and that made all the difference. From tragedy had come love, from pain had come healing, and from a chance encounter under a juniper tree had come a lifetime of happiness. It was, they both agreed without needing to say the words, more than enough. It was everything.